The following is a paid program sponsored by Murphy Battista LLP. BNN Bloomberg 1410 and Bell Media do not endorse the views expressed or the goods or services promoted in the program. This is BNN Bloomberg 1410, and it's time for The Law Show with Jim Gordon, Vancouver's only law-focused radio show, offering a comprehensive look at everything you need to know about the law. Joining us this week, Murphy Battista LLP, Vancouver personal injury lawyers. Now, here's your host, Jim Gordon.
Welcome to The Law Show. As the announcer mentioned, I'm Jim Gordon. We're here with Joe Murphy. He's joining us once again to talk about some issues that are very important. If you've not heard the show before, I think you're in for a really educational hours. We tackle a number of things. Joe, welcome, first of all, to the show.
Thank you.
Joe, why don't we start with a little bit about you, your history, and the philosophy of Murphy Battista as well as yourself.
Jim, I graduated from UBC in 1975, many years ago, and began working for a small Vancouver firm. I was really fortunate in that during law school, I worked as an insurance adjuster for one of the private firms that was just shutting down because ICBC came into existence in 1972. So I gained a lot of knowledge by working for an insurance company, and since graduating from law school, I've acted for probably thousands of people who have been injured in a variety of ways. Mm-hmm. Mostly car accidents, but there's so many other ways people get hurt. It's amazing.
What'd you say, too, when you look at the statistics that are often released by insurance company, that ICBC, some of these statistics that you've told me about in the past are just shocking in terms of your chances of being in an accident, the chances of being in an accident as a pedestrian. Can you talk a little about the rise in accidents just in the Lower Mainland alone?
Well, accidents are a function of how busy the roads are, but I think the situation's become far worse with distracted driving. When I leave my house and get on the road, I'm not worried anymore about drunk drivers. Mm-hmm. They're still there, but it's very rare.
Crack down on that for sure.
Yeah, effectively. But I'm worried about distracted drivers, people who are not watching what they're doing. Sometimes while driving along, they're on their cell phone. Yeah. And it just is so dangerous for everybody. But it seems that some people are addicted to their phones. Yeah. They can't leave them alone. They can't put them down. Maybe the analogy is it'd be like reading a book and driving a car at the same time. The more you're interested in reading the book, the less you're going to watch what's going on the road around you. And that, I think, has caused this huge spike in accidents. Not that people are more reckless, but people are far more distracted. Particularly those, as I say, who have this need to constantly check or use their cell phones.
I saw a photo recently that really does sum up what you're talking about, and I guess it was captured by the police, but a guy had a book on his lap, and he was eating a sandwich while holding a drink and driving still, and he was at a light. With the recent increase, say, in fines, is it one of those things where it's going to take a number of years to really sink in with people? Because they're fining people, but is it making a dent?
They're fining people, but what's the chance that someone who's using their phone a lot while they're driving is going to be caught? You see police sometimes where there's a busy intersection might have someone watching, but you have to be able to watch everywhere. I believe that until technology comes in that prevents a person who's driving from having a phone anywhere in the car with them, the problem is going to continue, and it's going to cause accidents, and it's going to cause deaths. If the law said and the technology required your phone to be in the trunk of the car, that would make things much better.
Is it even, Joe, not to put too fine of a point on it, but I know I have a number of friends that actually have the hookup where they don't hold their phone, they can talk while they're driving. Yep. I even find that still tremendously distracting. You're not holding your phone, you're not texting, but you're still talking to somebody.
Yeah, it's the analogy I'd provide is it's like having a conversation with someone in your car. Does it take some of your attention away from the road? Yes. Yeah. Does it take a lot away from the road? Probably not.
Okay, good to know.
Because, as I say, conversations in cars have always been part of the process, and that's never been a big cause of accidents.
I'm not basing this on any science or stats. I've just always found that I wonder if you're actually devoting even more of the concentration to somebody if they're not in the car and you're talking to them via your phone speaker or what have you, that it might force you to focus a little more?
Possible.
Let's move on then to, I think everybody has either experienced an accident or knows somebody who has. Now, you have the accident. Let's talk about why someone may need a personal injury lawyer.
I think what it comes down to, Jim, is if you're hurt in the accident and you don't recover fairly quickly. Mm-hmm. Most people that are injured in car accidents have neck and back injuries, and most of those people go on to either a full or pretty good recovery. And if you've got a good recovery, full recovery within 3-4 months of the accident, I don't think you need to hire a lawyer. It's probably a good idea to phone a lawyer and say, give me a ballpark idea of what my claim is worth, so you're armed with that knowledge when you deal with ICBC. But those people don't need a lawyer. And I think some firms, I know my firm, if someone comes in with that story, we say, listen, you don't need to hire us. Here's what you need to do to navigate the process and end up with a fair settlement from ICBC.
And I mean, because it's last time you and I spoke, we talked about the fragility that somebody may be in at that stage. It's very traumatic. You're vulnerable. So I think there's also a fear of dealing with ICBC or by yourself. And I don't know of many people who have done that. And that's not a criticism of the insurance company itself. But I think that, as you said, it's certainly worth your time to call. You will be an honest person and say, you don't need us now, or you may not need us at all. But it's still worth the reaching out.
Oh, yes. Yeah, find out how the system works and what your rights are. It's interesting. Years ago, about a third of the people injured in car accidents hired lawyers. Now I think that's approaching 2/3. Mm-hmm. And I think in large part because people don't have the same trust or distrust that they used to have. They used to feel fairly comfortable dealing directly with ICBC or another insurance company. Now they're a little more skeptical. That may be because of all the TV ads you see by the personal injury firms that say, don't call them, call us, we can help you. My firm doesn't do any TV advertising. Mm-hmm. We spend our money supporting groups like the Paraplegic Association, the Brain Injury Association. We have a resource center at GS Strong that helps people there with anything they need. Mm-hmm. That's where we spend our advertising dollars. We think that's more worthwhile than having a TV ad. There's one firm that has a TV ad that has the lawyer saying, here's what we are. Well, that fellow's not a lawyer. And I've always said to people, would you hire a neurosurgeon from a TV ad? And they all say no. And then I always say, if a firm is really good, why would they need to advertise on TV? And it's another sort of obvious question.
Can I get your thoughts, too, on when you see these commercials, often these firms actually aren't here. They may fan out the work to somebody here. Is that... Am I reading that right? I mean, I like the fact that I come to see you. You are here. We should mention that you have your head office in Vancouver, but you also have offices in Surrey, Kelowna, and Vernon.
And we've always been in Vancouver as the prime office. There's some firms that are really from back east, and they come in and try and say that they're a BC firm. And I guess if they have an office here, they are. But again, it's trying to tell people that you need us, give us a call. Some people do need help, legal help. Yeah. The more serious the injury, the more important it is to hire a lawyer. But that TV advertising is something, as I say, my firm's never done, and we never will do it. We'd rather spend our money on worthwhile things that help people.
And we should mention as well, Joe, if you want more information of Joe, you can go to murphybattista.com. How can people find out about you if they don't know of the website? I mean, obviously it's a very competitive world, and that's why you see these firms advertise quite heavily. There's a few that I won't name, of course, but that you see on TV all the time.
Yes. Go to our website. We have quite an extensive website, but more importantly, go and look at the Google reviews of former clients. Yes. That tells the story far better than the website. I've always said there's no better advertising than a very satisfied client.
Yeah. I had a friend not too long ago that thought he was dealing with the person in the commercial, And it wasn't the big firm. They had fanned it out to somebody smaller who would nothing against them, but he said, that's not who I signed up with.
There was a firm that has done extensive advertising in BC that for the most part takes these people that hire that firm and they sell the file to another lawyer. So they're really a broker rather than a law firm. And again, you have to ask yourself, why is this firm, if they're really good at what they do and they've been in existence for years and years and years, why do they have to advertise on TV?
I think the point you brought up I didn't think of before is the neurosurgeon. I think I'd be calling up somebody who advertises on TV.
Yep.
We're listening, and you're listening to the Law Show with Joe Murphy, a partner with Murphy Battista. As Joe mentioned, more information, murphybattista.com. Joe, you also have a QC after your name. Before we go to break, I want to get you to explain a little of that, if you don't mind.
QC is a designation given to about 15 lawyers a year in BC. It's given because of the fact they've either shown excellence in their work and or done a lot of work for the legal community, lecturing, doing a variety of sort of community service work in the law field. I got mine in 1999. I believe it was for having done a number of cases that had fabulous results for my clients, both in front of judges and in front of juries. And I was delighted to get it. It's a designation that comes from Old England.
Sure.
And in England, you had to have either a KC, King's Counsel, or a QC before you could act on behalf of the government, the Crown. So it was given to lawyers who were identified as having an excellent skill set.
Good to have.
And that's been imported into BC. And as I say, there's about 15 lawyers a year in the province that get the QC.
Very nice. And you've had yours since 1999?
Yes.
Very nice. It's Joe Murphy. He's part of the Law Show. We're talking today. He is a partner with Murphy Battista. We are going to talk more. Please stick with us. It's the Law Show on BNN Bloomberg Radio 1410.
You're on BNN Bloomberg 1410, and we're back with the Law Show with Jim Gordon.
Welcome back. It's the Law Show. We're with Joe Murphy, partner of Murphy Battista. We're talking about injuries, personal lawyers, what you should do, education for sure this hour. Joe, I mentioned to you before we went on the air, waxing a little nostalgic about when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, and certainly from the time I was probably 4 or 5 till the time I was my final year at high school. School trips were a big thing. It was always get the parents to sign off. I remember sometimes my friends would make jokes that they'd sign for their parents and get it done. School, of course, is back, and things have changed from when I was a child, and parents have to be more informed. I think that's what I want to start with. Parents listening out there, your kid is going to, say, a trip to Whistler or something. Can you talk a bit about what parents need to know and say the thing about consent forms and waivers? I think parents really need to hear your expert advice on school trips, now with school being back.
Jim, the starting point for school trips, and to give you a background, my firm has acted for a number of students terribly injured on school trips. 2 quadriplegics and a kid with a significant brain injury. So that's the sort of mindset I have. And from what I learned in doing those cases about what should be done and what usually goes wrong that results in a terrible injury, a terrible lifelong disability to some good kid. The starting point for school trips should be, if we're going to take these kids and we're going to take them out to an activity that has any sort of danger risk to it,
right?
The educational benefit of that trip has to be greater than the risks you're putting your kids to.
So as a parent, you're sitting down and saying, okay, that trip to Whistler, there's going to be some hiking, some other thing. I have to really analyze it.
Well,
for the educational element.
For a lot of parents, they don't know what all's involved when the kid says, I'm going to Whistler with my class for the day.
Right.
Or I'm going on a hike. I believe it's up to the school that has the most knowledge about exactly what's going to happen to ask themselves, what is the purpose of this trip and what are the risks associated and what's the benefit? And I'll just give you an example of a case that we had in the office. It was a 14-year-old girl in, I think, grade 9 or 10.
Okay.
She was on a school trip that was a 3-day wilderness hike, So you say, well, the fresh air, the exercise,
Win-win.
the
It's perfect.
bonding, all these things. And she ended up with a significant brain injury because the group she was with were going up a very steep hill.
Sure.
And she was following along in the line, and the person above her ended up dislodging a rock that bounced down this steep hill and hit her in the head.
Mm-hmm.
So when we got that case in, we went to some people who were hiking experts and said, okay, when you're going up a steep hill like this, what are the rules? And the rule is one person at a time goes up the hill. So if they do dislodge a rock,
It's not
going to hit anyone. Pretty simple stuff.
But it's in part my naivety, because it's been a lot of years since I've been on a school trip. But is this, looking in hindsight, is it, well, Mr. Johnson, the science teacher, was going to be taking them up. Well-meaning teacher, they all love him, let's say, but he's taking the kids up. You bring up another point that you almost have to go through the itinerary and say, oh, by the way, I noticed they're doing this. Is there going to be an expert, or is this going to be a teacher that is well-meaning but really doesn't know things like you just mentioned?
Well, one of the rules, Jim, is if you're going to take students on a trip, you have to make sure that each student can safely do this activity.
Right.
So, for example, if you're taking your students to the beach, you've got to say, do each of these students know how to swim? And I did a case involving a group of students who were taken to a beach. It was a lake that had a gradual drop-off and then a total drop-off. Most of the kids they took did not know how to swim. My client's son, who was 16, did not know how to swim, but this was the summertime and it was a beautiful day.
Yeah.
And they were playing in the water, and then suddenly he disappeared, which meant he went over the drop-off,
Right.
and he drowned. But really, the question that the school should have asked is, if there's kids that want to go on the trip, do they know how to swim?
But is that not, again, I don't mean to make light of it by any means, but I got 25 kids. Is there not a hand raising in the class? Let's just double check, please. Does everybody know how to swim? Who doesn't know how to swim here?
I would think that they've got to be a little more careful than, say, show us the hands of those who can swim. I think they have to understand that. So the rule is the kid has to have the skill level to do the activity. If not, you have to teach that child that skill level so that they can do it safely. And if they can't gain that skill, you either change the trip or you leave them out.
So the kid can go on the trip, but hey, today, young John, you will be sitting on the sidelines because you can't do this.
And you need teachers to supervise to ensure that happens.
How many, if you've, say, got 10 of your kids going on a school trip to, we'll keep using Whistler as an example, and you've got 20 kids, how many adults have to be there?
Well, that's a fascinating question, because I did one case involving a school trip to Whistler for the day, and the group of kids, these were kids in grade 11, and they were told, you got to stay together. So the kids went to the terrain park, and they were doing a variety of jumps in the terrain park. They were sticking together.
Sure.
And my client, who was a very athletic kid, thought, well, I'm going to try doing one of these jumps that the other kids are doing because I know I'm really athletic.
Yeah.
He broke his neck. He ended up quadriplegic. So he was following the instructions about sticking together, and he was, as most grade 11 boys will do, thinking, I'll give this a try.
And, and it's fearless.
If he can do it, I can do it.
Yeah.
So what was needed there was a teacher either saying nobody goes in the terrain park and does these incredible jumps, or a teacher saying, okay, I'm going to go with you to the terrain park. So, how many teachers do you need? It depends on the activity. I know from having one of my children, they were about 9, we had a birthday party at a swimming pool. And I had one adult for every 3 kids. And I thought later, that's not enough. It should have been one for every 2.
Okay.
Because, again, it's just so dangerous.
Yeah.
And you have to understand what these kids are going to do. They're either fear or lack of fear. And the fact that, with the grade 11 boy, he saw his friends doing it and thought, well, I should be able to do that.
And the example that you gave earlier about the boy who unfortunately drowned on that trip, the parents come to see you. Are they being? I mean, the schools must be. I mean, everyone goes into defensive protection mode. I would imagine that's involved. The school board, the school.
Well,
What are they saying when they come to you? Do they know what their rights are? That's obviously why you can sit them down and say, "Okay, let's go over the whole event."
Well, the overwhelming situation is one of just total tragedy.
Sure.
Death of a child. In this case, this was an only child. So it was just the total tragedy. In that case, I dealt with the lawyer acting for the insurer for the school, and there was, sort of an unsaid acknowledgement that this should never have happened. So you deal with it, but it's the best thing to do is avoid these bad accidents where kids are terribly hurt. And you do that by organizing the trip carefully, by making sure you understand what the kids are going to be doing, by making sure the teachers are capable of supervising, they know what they're doing, and that they provide the supervision to make sure each kid is safe and competent in doing this. And when you go to the parents to sign the form has to set out all what's involved in the trip.
Right.
It's not a matter, we're going to Whistler for a day of skiing, sign here.
Fun outdoor activities, but you don't describe anything.
How can the parents make a decision when they know that? One of the interesting things, Jim, is about the forms that come home from school. There's usually two parts to them, or two purposes. One is a consent. This is a consent to take my son John on this trip. The other one is these forms often say, and we release the school or we waive any claims. A parent in British Columbia, does not have the right, the legal authority, to give up any of their children's rights. So you can have mother and father sign a form, and it has no legal effect because parents don't have the right to give up their children's legal rights.
You said to me, though, you can consent.
You can consent, yep.
But you can't waive.
Exactly. The parent cannot do that.
So a parent, before hearing this today, I didn't realize that. So they sign off on that.
Yep.
There's a tragedy, unfortunately. How does that play into the event?
Well, the parents consent, but there's no waiver. There's no release.
Right.
It may say that, but the document has no legal validity.
Interesting. And I have a friend of mine that is a bit of a hike enthusiast, does a lot of it. He actually has told me before that when trips have been planned in his child's life, he actually volunteers to go along if they want him, being an expert, because of what you said earlier, that Mr. Johnson, the science teacher, may mean well, but something simple as one person at a time avoids that accident.
Yep.
Yeah. Interesting, Joe. Talking to Joe Murphy. He is a partner with Murphy Battista. More information, you can find out more on Joe and his company at murphybattista.com. Head office in Vancouver. He also has offices in Surrey, Kelowna, and Vernon. We're talking about, with school being back, I guess just a few weeks, we're talking about how you as a parent should be more in tune and educate yourself on these trips. So, Joe, you don't want to be, I know some parents and friends of mine that they don't want to appear like they're being, I guess, helicopter hovering. But at the same time, I think from this one segment we're doing here, the big advice you're saying, though, is that you really have to take the time, even if you feel like you're pestering the school. I want to know everything about this.
Well, it really comes down to, Jim, if there's a risk involved in this activity, then the parent has to be very careful about saying, yeah, my child can go on this. And it's really a function of the risk. If they're going to a symphony, listen to the symphony orchestra, I'm not, as a parent, too concerned about that because I know they ride the bus and then they have to cross the road. But if it's anything involving the outdoors with water is the most dangerous thing that you can mix in with a school trip, snow, rugged terrain, those kinds of things, then you as a parent have got to say, just a minute, let's firstly understand what all this trip involves.
Certainly.
Understand what's being done to make it safe, and then ask yourself, what's the educational benefit of this trip?
Right.
If there's a risk involved, there's got to be a benefit that's greater than the risk.
It's really interesting because I in this, again, from when I was a child and when you were a child, where kids did have certainly more freedom, I just know that parents are so tightly controlling often, in a good way, the protection thing, that I'm really amazed that trips today are not a lot more cautious than they would have been when I was running free all summer and in school and everything like that. And as I said to you, the no seatbelt era and all that kind of thing that now. But you're right. So folks, if you're listening, of course, really, I know everyone takes an interest in their kids' lives, but this is something where the school really has to account and a full explanation.
The better the job the school does, the less the parents have to worry, because they then should have the whole trip laid out for them when they're asked to sign a consent. So
Okay.
I think the principal responsibility rests with the school.
Yeah. And is the school, I don't want to get too into the weeds here, but with something like this, again, a family comes to see you through a tragedy like this. What is how does the school play into this now?
The school, schools and the teachers are insured by an entity in Victoria that insures all the schools and hospitals. So it's that entity that's like an insurance company that you deal with.
Okay. Excellent. Very good advice, Joe. Thank you. And again, if you want to talk to Joe, you can check out murphybattista.com. And as we mentioned, head office in Vancouver, but offices in Surrey, Kelowna, and Vernon. We're talking to Joe Murphy. He's a partner with Murphy Battista. Much, much more coming up on The Law Show. Stick with us here on BNN Bloomberg Radio 1410.
This is BNN Bloomberg 1410. Now, more of The Law Show with Jim Gordon.
We are back with The Law Show. We're talking with Joe Murphy, QC and partner of Murphy Battista. And I got to tell you, Joe, this is tremendously educational. I think we'll probably have a lot of viewers out there, listeners, I should say, that are getting this advice from you about things you really probably wouldn't spend a lot of time thinking about, and that's no reflection on you as a parent. But we're talking about school trips right now. School, of course, is back in session after probably a great summer. You mentioned something to me that I found was an interesting statement, is that parents can sometimes, again, we're not being overly critical of parents, but it's a school trip. Therefore, it must be safe because the schools know what they're doing, and schools don't have a monopoly on safety. So, again, following up on our last discussion before the break about knowing what your kids are doing, and if it's bonding that you really want your kids to experience on a school trip, there are safe ways to do it.
Yeah, Jim, the example was the 3-day camping, hiking trip. Class goes on to bond, and I think the bonding opportunity is great in something like that. But if you're going to do that, keep them away from the really steep terrain, keep them away from any rivers or lakes, and the risks of something going badly, of some kid getting badly hurt, drops way down. So the activity, the bonding, that's still the same, but you just take away the things that carry risk with them. I think it's reasonable for parents to think that the school will have thought this out and will have planned something that's safe. But at the same time, I say to parents, you've got to check and see, and not check to see what the form says, but what the actual activity is. Tell me exactly what's going to happen, where you're going to go, all of those things. So I believe the primary responsibility is for the school to scope it out, to plan it out, and to tell the parents what all's involved. It's
interesting, though, and if you could share that one of the cases that you were involved in where you get a rafting trip, which itself can be dangerous. I've experienced the whitewater, but even a simple rafting. But it's also things you have to make sure there's somebody there, even when you're not on the water, on the river, let's say. And please tell the story to our listeners, because this is something you can't predict everything. Of course, you can't prepare for everything, but here's a great example.
Yeah, this was a rafting trip supervised by professional rafting company, and it was down a river north of Vancouver. I forget which river. Anyways, the professional rafters were in charge when they're on the river, and the teachers were in charge when they were on the shore. They pulled the rafts in for lunch, and they're having lunch, and some people, whether it's students and teachers, took one of the rafts and they turned it over, and they were then standing on the raft, jumping into the river.
Right.
And everyone was having a great time. And a 15-year-old girl gets up, standing on top of the raft, and says to the teacher who's there beside the river, I'm thinking about trying a shallow dive. And the teacher said, fine, just be careful. And she dove in and broke her neck. Terrible, terrible tragedy.
Awful. Yeah.
And I think had the teacher said to the rafting guys, is this activity safe, even jumping in, they would have said no.
Yeah.
But it was the teachers, well-meaning, but it's a good example of a teacher lacking the knowledge and understanding to be able to say what's safe and what's not.
Right.
And that trip didn't need to have any jumping off the boats at lunchtime to have been a great experience for the kids.
Yeah, a great bonding experience.
It's just a great tragedy because you have teachers that make terrible mistakes and they feel terrible about this. They're just grief-stricken when they know what's happened. But you have these children with these lifelong disabilities, and that's the greater tragedy. And it can be avoided without preventing these kids from going on these fun trips that have great bonding opportunities.
Circling back on a point you made in our last segment about as a parent sitting down and analyzing, again, you don't want to deny your child the benefit of trips like this, the bonding and outdoors and putting your phone down for more than a minute. But you really have to sit down and do a check on the educational element to the trip. These things are meant to be educational compared to, say, the risks. So you as a parent, can you walk us through that?
Well, let's say you've got a school trip, grade 11 and 12, to Whistler for skiing for the day. If you're a parent that would be comfortable sending your kid on their own up to Whistler for the day, put them on the bus, they can get there and get their lift ticket and go up, then you might say, fine, this is something that I'm comfortable with. If you're a parent, though, that says, you're not a very good skier, so if you're going to do that, I'm going to come with you.
Yeah.
Then you've got to be careful and say, okay, what supervision is really being provided here? And again, like the case I did, when you get 15, 16-year-old boys together, they can be great kids, well-behaved, but they're going to compete with one another as to who can do the biggest and best jump. And in the case I did, that resulted in just a terrible injury to one of the students.
Who was just doing, you said?
He was doing what he was told to do, and he was described at trial by the teachers as a really good kid who did what you told him to. But the results were just terrible for him. And that's bad for everybody. It's bad for the school, it's bad for the teachers, it's bad for the parents, and it's especially tragic for the kid. And if you're careful, you can take the risk of that happening down to almost zero.
Yeah.
If you carefully plan these things out and avoid situations that are potentially dangerous.
And when you sit down with a parent or parents that have gone through this tragedy, you talk about the young woman, the diving accident. Can you just tell me? I'm very curious as to, nothing is set in stone, but what is the length for something like this? I mean, you're protecting them, you're helping them through an awful time. Can you walk just our listeners through the steps of what you do, because they come to you?
Well, you usually have a lawsuit which is filed in the Supreme Court of British Columbia, and there are various steps in a lawsuit, and then the matter either settles or goes to trial. The time period could be 2 years or more. If it's more, it's usually because the full impact of the injuries isn't understood. I did one case that I had for 18 years because my client
18
was a 2-year-old girl terribly injured in a car accident. She had a brain injury, and it wasn't until she was 20 that I could really understand what the long-term impact on her was of that brain injury. Because as she was a kid growing up, the impact appeared to be fairly minor. But once she graduated from school and we saw her in the workforce, then it became obvious that she was going to have big struggles and challenges throughout her life.
And you mentioned earlier in our first segment about when someone maybe comes to see you with something is not a major injury, parents are still concerned. They want to check out what their legal rights are. That there can be a time where you may say, let's bring John back here, young John back here in 6 months and see where he's at. That parents shouldn't take that as a discouraging comment at all, right? You're just looking out for them.
No, Jim, the rules in BC is if you or I were injured in an accident today, we have 2 years from today to start a lawsuit.
Okay.
After 2 years, we've missed the chance to do that. If you're a child under the age of 19 and you're injured, you have 2 years from the time you turn 19 years of age.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So the younger the child, the more time they have to see what the impact of the injury is. And oftentimes kids bounce back. They heal very quickly. Kids can do amazingly well. So with the child, your time frame to start a lawsuit is far, far greater than for an adult. And you use that time to watch and see how they're doing.
And I would imagine, citing personal experience, I mentioned to you about an accident I was in a number of years ago where it did involve a number of people and entities, and it is good that you can get to someone like you and your firm, because there's also the other part, and again, not being critical of the doctors, but my experience was there was like 3 or 4 different doctors all arguing on what I should have done operation-wise. It was nice that there was someone who was able to step in and go, okay, let's just get these guys away from Jim, who's recovering. And it was nice that I had that support there, and that's what you do, which is perfect for somebody who's, again, I was in a tremendously vulnerable position like that.
Yeah, Jim, we're lawyers, we're not doctors, but what we're able to do sometimes is put our clients in touch with very, very good specialists, and they're the ones that provide the medical advice. But oftentimes when people are hurt, there's a lack of coordination between all the medical people about what's happening.
That was my experience.
And,
everybody was, no one had come together.
We often hire occupational therapists to work with our clients, and they coordinate things. They're like a quarterback. The term occupational therapy, the label is really wrong. It should be a functional therapist.
Okay. Oh.
It's not about work, it's about functioning. So when you talk about an occupational therapist, they deal with everything in a person's life, not just work.
And when someone comes to see you, as you mentioned, you're not a doctor, you're a lawyer, but are most of your clients usually coming in where they haven't done that contact with that specialist, or they're coming to you going, here's what happened, please
come
take
in
my hand and guide
early
me.
on, and they come in the middle, and they come in late. I've had clients come in years after an accident, and it's more challenging to put a case together when years have gone by and things either have been done or not done. People with head injuries really struggle with a variety, with their functioning. And oftentimes, as a result of that struggle, they go and see their doctor less and less and less. So you have medical records that say almost nothing, but you have a person whose life has changed big time.
I think the first time we spoke, you did talk about people, everybody can relate to this, I'm sure it was something like a head injury of some sort, that you're less and less feeling inclined to visit a doctor or visit someone like you that, I'll just get over this. It's just a headache. I have my bell rung, as they used to say.
The other thing that's really unusual about a brain injury is this. If I have an injury to my knee, I know better than anyone else in this world what my knee feels like, how it is. But if I have a brain injury, then I'm one of the least able to tell you the impact it has. So with a brain injury case, I want to talk to what's called the significant others, the mother, the father, the brother, the sister, the husband, the wife, the coworkers, because they will notice things that the person with the brain injury does not.
Certainly.
They say things are fine, and in fact they're not. So, and that's unique for a brain injury, because any other injury is something a person's very, very aware of.
Yeah, it's not a sprint. No, it's a long run. Great advice, Joe. We're talking with Joe Murphy from Murphy Battista on The Law Show. If you want more information or want to reach out to Joe, you can go to murphybattista.com. Head office in Vancouver. Also offices in Surrey, Kelowna, and Vernon. We're coming back with more with Joe. This is the Law Show on BNN Bloomberg Radio 1410.
Time now for more of The Law Show with Jim Gordon on BNN Bloomberg 1410.
It is The Law Show. We're with Joe Murphy. He is a partner with Murphy Battista and a QC, Queen's Counsel. You're listening to The Law Show, as we mentioned. Joe, it's been a great educational hour for me so far, but we've got more to talk about. Let's get into what is going to be happening next April, I believe April 1st, 2019. What's the government doing right now for persons involved in an accident? And again, can we talk and lead into what's going to happen next spring?
Jim, what the government has announced is starting April 1st, 2019, there's going to be a limit on the recovery for pain and suffering for what they've labeled or described as minor injuries. The problem is defining and understanding what a minor injury is. I had hoped that the government, if they wanted to do something that changed the money they were paying out, would simply bring in a deductible and say, okay, everyone's injured, there's a $5,000 deductible, so that $5,000 is cut off every injury claim. And that's very simple to manage and very simple to understand. Instead, they've said if you have these as they describe it, minor injuries, then the most you can get for the pain and suffering is $5,500. You still claim for your income loss, and you still claim for your out-of-pocket expenses, but that's the pain and suffering. The problem with the other jurisdictions that have brought in this kind of rule is you can sometimes spend more money fighting about whether this is or isn't a minor injury than you're saving by bringing in the $5,500 limit. And that's why, again, the deductible is so much simpler and straightforward and easy to manage, but they decided not to do that.
Can you, Joe, give us a brief overview of minor injuries?
Well, it depends who you ask. If I'm in a rear-end accident and I have headaches and a sore neck and sore back for, resolves in three or 4 months, and this is the key, and I'm able to go back to my normal activities and I don't have any problems,
right,
I would think that would be a minor injury. But the problem is that some injuries appear to be minor, but they have significant ongoing problems. And that's why I've always said to clients when they phoned and said, gee, I think I've recovered, is I say, well, go out and do all the things you normally do, and then phone me and tell me how you are, because we need to find out what the future holds. And so often following an accident, people are very careful what they do.
Right.
If they've got a sore back, they're going to avoid lifting or bending or carrying. So before you can really understand that a person's recovered, is they've got to go back and do all those normal things.
And then assess and come to see you and say, 5 of the 10 things I used to do, I can't do anymore.
Yeah, or I have to do them differently, or I avoid them because my back's sore or stiff when I do them. People carry on, particularly mothers that oftentimes have a full-time job and they have kids and they have a household. And, they have an incredibly busy day, and they don't have the ability usually to say, well, I can't carry this laundry.
Yeah.
There's no one else around to do
that's right.
that.
It's not going to get done.
I can't carry this kid. I can't carry these groceries. So really, back and neck injuries can be really bad if a person who has such a busy life is stuck where they don't fully recover, and every day is a challenge to figure out how they're going to do these things without bringing on pain.
What does this mean for new personal injury victims with cases that need to go beyond 2 years?
If your accident occurred before January 1st, 2019, the new rules do not apply.
Before January 1st?
2019. So it's only accidents on or after April Fool's Day 2019 that have the new rule applying about setting a maximum on the pain and suffering. And we'll see how effective that is in terms of bringing down costs. But again, my concern is when you have a verbal description of what a minor injury is, there's oftentimes big fights about whether some injury does or doesn't fall into that category.
And where does, say, I don't want to say minor, but say head injuries, concussion. As you said, you have the accident. You don't know how you're feeling yet, but maybe things are a little off. Where does that fit in?
Well, that's the problem, because the definition seems to suggest that if you have emotional or psychiatric problems, that falls into the minor injuries. People with concussions, people with PTSD. So you can have someone that didn't, people who witnessed something and have PTSD. PTSD, Jim, is interesting from the medical point of view, because if it's left untreated, the person's symptoms ongoing really look like a brain injury.
Yeah.
And the key with PTSD is early effective treatment. But if it's not recognized or denied, you don't get access to that early effective treatment. You have people who develop psychiatric problems following an accident, and sometimes the accident can be quite minor, but it triggers these things that occur in a person's mind, in their psyche, that ends up creating huge problems. So, everybody's different. Everyone comes with a big different background. You get 5 people in a car rear-ended, and 2 of them might be badly hurt, and one may be fine, no symptoms, and the other 2 say, well, my neck was sore for a few weeks. Same car, same collision, but they're all different people, different backgrounds, different history, different emotional makeup.
Do you find, and I will preface what I'm going to say by a comment you made in our last talk about ICBC being one of the best insurance companies you deal with. Uh, Not to be critical, but it's amazing how I don't know of too many people that when they have an accident, minor or major, I don't know of anybody in my life, my experience, that does this on their own. I think there's a fear of dealing.
Oh, there is. There
And
is
so
a fear.
they want to get to somebody like you.
Yep.
But can you talk a bit about the statement I just made? Because again, not being critical, but I did not expect that.
Okay, I've practiced, Jim, for more than 40 years, and I've dealt with well over 100 different insurance companies. And of all the insurance companies I deal with, I find ICBC one of the best to deal with in terms of I know their system, I know their coverage, I know the people. And my office has a specific group of adjusters that handle the claims in my office, so we know them.
Right.
And we may not agree. We may go to trial and battle it out. We may have great battles on issues. But overall, they're one of the best insurance companies to deal with. They're generally very professional. I say generally because there may be cases where we have big battles with adjusters.
Sure.
But overall, I would rather deal with a claim where ICBC is the insurance company than just about any of the private insurance companies.
Interesting.
And we deal with private companies because we have clients injured outside BC, or we have clients injured in BC caused by an out-of-province motorist, or you have a variety of other injuries. There's so many ways that people get hurt.
We're talking with Joe Murphy. He is a partner with Murphy Battista. You can check out more information at murphybattista.com. Head office in Vancouver, also offices in Surrey, Kelowna, and Vernon. Joe, if you look at the landscape of people out there and ICBC and the changes coming next spring, you see the government driving the narrative quite a lot, but do you find that a lot of people are just really confused as to what they can do? I mean,
they don't know what the changes are. They don't know when they're coming into effect. And the government's saying we've got to bring the costs down. The increased costs recently, as I've said earlier, I think are from distracted driving. And taking someone who's a victim of a distracted driver and say we're going to pay you less because we want insurance to be more affordable strikes me as simply unfair.
Yeah.
But I can understand the government saying we've got these increased costs and we don't want to go and increase premiums too much. The Liberal government over the course of their reign drew out about $1.3 billion from ICBC and put it into general revenues. But ICBC was set up in 1972, and it was designed to run on a break-even basis so that if they had extra money left over 1 year, it reduced the premiums in the next year. And it was the past government that decided they were going to change that and started drawing money out of ICBC. So when the government today said we've got a financial, I think someone called it a dumpster fire.
That phrase caught on.
That's in large part because the $1.3 billion that should be there to put out the dumpster fire was taken out and used for something else. People sometimes say to me, my friend in Ontario or Alberta or Saskatchewan or Winnipeg has the same car and he pays less for insurance. They pay less because the insurance they're buying is less.
Yeah.
The product is different and the coverage is simply less. ICBC has, I think, a fabulous insurance coverage. We in BC have the best insured cars in North America because over time people have become aware and insurance agents have helped them become aware of the need and the benefit of having lots of insurance. And the result is when a client walks in my office door, there's probably enough insurance to pay their claim because sometimes there isn't.
Yeah.
You get someone who's terribly injured, but there's not enough insurance money. And that's tough to be injured, tough to have your life changed, but even tougher when you find out that the amount of compensation you get isn't what it should be.
Can you tell us then, with the final minutes we have left, discuss post-April 1st, 2019?
Well, I think what's going to happen is adjusters are going to be telling people you've got a minor injury claim, it's $5,500 for pain and suffering. There's no point you going to see a lawyer because that's all we're going to pay.
Yeah.
So let's try and deal with your claim. Dealing directly with the adjuster is fine as long as the person has the knowledge and experience to do that. But often the person doesn't know what their rights are. They don't know how the system works. And there's a real disadvantage. I invite people to give us a call, and we will tell them, here's what you need to know and here's what you need to do. Because oftentimes, if there is a minor claim, they're better off handling it themselves.
Mm-hmm. And
they don't need a lawyer for a very minor claim.
But also, is there this impression of wanting to settle? If you're the insurance company,
ICBC wants to settle as quickly as possible for as little as possible, and that's the job of every insurance company. Mm-hmm. I always say to people, you never settle until you're fully recovered and you're back to your normal activities, because until you get to that point, you really don't know what the problems are from the accident.
And I think as we wrap things up, I think a great example is the story you mentioned earlier in the show, and if you missed it, we'll get you just to tell it again about that child that was injured at the age of 2. And what, 18 years, 17 years later?
Jim, that was a terrible case because it was a head-on collision with a drunk driver. The child's mother that was pregnant with what was going to be a brother or sister was killed. Mm-hmm. This was a 2-year-old who was left with a significant brain injury. And I followed her over the years from the age of 2. She did fairly well in school. She was a bright kid, very motivated. In high school, she was on the honor roll throughout high school, but when she got finished high school, we found that regardless of how bright she was and how motivated she was, the best job she could get was a cleaning lady, provided she went to the same homes every week, because she couldn't deal with change and she couldn't deal with problem solving.
So the high school was the consistent structure.
Oh, totally structured.
That she could deal with.
And because she was such a nice kid, the teachers were very generous in making modifications for her. But it was only when she finished high school that I really understood what the impact was. And, that's subsequently become the rule for me and my firm is we wait with children with brain injuries, and we have tragically a bunch that we're acting for. We wait until they've finished school and they're sort of out into the world to assess what the long-term impact is.
Joe, it is always a pleasure to sit and talk with you. It's been an education for me. I'm not a parent, but our first part of our show talking about what parents need to do when the kids are planning a trip through school, of course, being back in. If you want more information on Joe, if you want to reach out to Joe and his company, it's murphybattista.com, head office in Vancouver. They have offices in Surrey, Kelowna, and Vernon. Joe, thank you very much. Always great pleasure talking to you. We've been listening to The Law Show here on BNN Radio 1410. I'm Jim Gordon. Thank you for joining us.
For listening to The Law Show on BNN Bloomberg 1410, featuring Murphy Battista LLP, Vancouver personal injury lawyers. If you'd like more information on today's topics, contact the team at murphybattista.com.
It's always best to understand your rights before dealing with any insurance company. If you or someone you know is being seriously injured, the team at Murphy Battista LLP can help. Book your free consultation at murphybattista.com.